But I truly believe, Tom, because I am a living testament of that people are redeemable, that with hope, anything is possible, and that a mistake doesn't necessarily make you a mistake, and that we are not the sum of our worst day, that your past is your lesson, you can learn from it, you can teach other people with it. The present, today is a gift, and the future is your motivation.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to this edition of Leading Through Unprecedented Times. I'm Tom Murray, your host, and I couldn't be any more excited for this episode, and you are in for a treat. Joining me today is somebody I am so proud to call a good friend, and that is the one and only Damon West. Damon, how you doing?
Tom, man, great to see you again, man. I'm doing well, and thank you for spending some time with me and inviting me on your show. I've been wanting to do your show for a long time, and I really appreciate the invite.
Well, I got to tell you, ironing out a day that we can record this because you are constantly on the road. Last time I saw you, you were a good 6-8 hours from home. I think on like a 15-day trip in a row. And so getting on your calendar, my friend, is not an easy task. So I appreciate your time today. Our listeners, our principals, our superintendents, those leading schools, throughout this pandemic, as you know, across the world, we've had so many different things going on, so many different pressures. For them, it's been, do they open schools? Do they close schools? Do they wear masks? They not wear masks? And this theme of this season's podcast is really around resilience. And I know nobody better that I could bring in to talk about resilience than you, my friend. And when I think about since 2020, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that's been in schools more than you have with your coffee bean message. It is a message that I can relate to, that I believe every educator can relate to, and also certainly needs to hear. You're diving into things around mental health, SEL, all the things that educators have realized that the pandemic has really put back on the forefront. So I want to turn this over to you. Tell us a bit about that coffee bean message, some of the things you're sharing with schools and districts as they continue to bring you in to share your message of resilience at a time when it's completely needed.
Yeah, no, for real, Tom, and that's true. I mean, since March of 2020, there was a pause there where no one was traveling, no one was speaking, but starting about in July, it was July of 2020, schools started contacting me because they're like, hey, this coffee bean message is exactly what we need, because the coffee bean message says that life is a pot of boiling water, but we have three choices of how we respond to this pot of boiling water called life. We can be like the carrot that turns soft and sad and weak, or the egg that turns hard and mad and mean, or we can be like the coffee bean that changes the pot of boiling water into a pot of coffee. The choice is ours to be that change agent in the world around us, and that our worlds are created from the inside out, not the outside in. It's really interesting. Long before John Gordon and I wrote this best-selling book called The Coffee Bean, I first heard the story of the coffee bean when I was in Dallas County Jail. And it was, it's totally incongruent with the guy you see in front of you today. But I mean, 13 years ago, I was a full-blown meth addict, that became a serial burglar whenever I was on the streets of Dallas. And I'd just been sentenced to life in prison for organized crime. And there was another inmate in Dallas County Jail that pulled me aside one day to tell me, hey, look, this is your life. It's this pot of boiling water called prison. And he told me about the three choices I had. And the last four words this guy shared with me on the way out the door when the prison bus came to pick me up: be a coffee bean. And Tom, really, that was my only hope. I held on to this thing. Hope is so important. We all need hope. And I held on to this message about being a coffee bean, because being a coffee bean is about being the best person you can be, spiritually, mentally, physically. Coffee beans stay in shape, and they work on themselves, and they don't let the pressures of the outside world change who they are within. And no matter what the environment is, like if I could become a coffee bean inside of a Texas maximum security prison, then you can be a coffee bean out here too. And really what the amazing thing about the coffee bean story is that I served 7 years and 3 months of a life sentence in a Texas maximum security prison, and the parole board came to visit me one day. It was in 2015. And by this point, I've established myself in prison as a model inmate, as a coffee bean. And the lady from parole said, Mr. West, we've been watching you. We've heard all about you, and that everywhere you go, there's positivity. You've changed one of the most, one of the worst situations there is, which is the maximum security level 5 prison, into a positive place everywhere you go. She said, so really what I want to know is this. She said, if you could be remembered for being anything in life, anything at all, she said, I want you to tell me what that would be in just one word: go. And Tom, and I'm a coffee bean. That was the easiest question in the world. I mean, there's a one question test decides whether I go home or stay in prison. And my answer to her was useful. I just want to be useful. And I think at the core of being human, we all want to be useful. At the core of being human, we all just want to belong and be loved. These are those social emotional learning things that we understand about life. And the parole board was like, yeah, you know what? That's great. And can you do that out in the free world? Can you find coffee beans out there in the free world? And so I said, give me my shot. And November 16th, 2015, I walked out of a Texas maximum security prison on parole for the rest of my life. But today I get to go into schools. I get to go into corporations. I get to go to sports teams. I get to go back into prisons and find coffee beans and share that message of resilience, that no matter what your outside circumstances are, the power is within you to change any situation you are in. In fact, this message got the attention of a coach named Dabo Swinney, the head football coach at Clemson. And he told his good friend John Gordon about this guy going around telling the coffee bean message that I'd been by there to speak to Clemson's football team. So that's when John Gordon called me out of the blue in the year 2018. This is before the pandemic, Tom. John said, hey, Damon, the world needs the coffee bean message right now. Let's deliver it to the world. And I mean, he couldn't be more prescient with his thought than that, because a few years later, the world really did need the coffee bean message. But the message has been the perfect message for schools, organizations all over America. Because when I go into these schools, whether it's a K through 2 group, a 3rd through 5th, a 6th through 8th, 9th through 12th, or just the teachers together in an assembly in a convocation type setting, I tailor the message for each group so they can understand how to apply the coffee bean message and how it works with social, emotional learning, with mental health. One of the things that's been really picking up with schools around America that bring me in is this anti-bullying campaign going on right now, because they're finding that the coffee bean message takes care of the anti-bullying, because now we've got positivity spreading around. If kids see someone that's not smiling, they pick them up, tell them I believe in you, and they tell them you're not being a coffee bean. Let me help you be a coffee bean. So it's really cutting down on bullying around these schools in America too. Tom, I'm just blown away by how many different angles this coffee bean message is taking heart in education in America.
Yeah, awesome stuff. And I will tell you, we had the privilege of having dinner together maybe a month or so ago. And I just, as you started to share your story, just in the glimpse here, I think it was about 3.5 hours that I just got to listen about your story of resilience. And it was the first time that I can say I sat down with somebody that can say, hey, I've been sentenced to life in prison and here you are, but your heart, your passion, your love for other people, your message, my friend, needs to be heard. And so as we bring that coffee bean message, and I love that analogy that you share, as we bring that to schools and districts across the country, what advice do you have for our superintendents, for our principals who are trying to create these types of cultures in their schools? They've got so much fear, anxiety. They're getting so much hate mail from the last board meeting because of some of the things that are happening that I'm sure you see in the news there as well. Where do you encourage our principals, our superintendents to create these cultures where people want to be, these cultures of being a coffee bean?
Yeah, I think that, for superintendents, you're dealing right now, and I could say probably across the board in America, with a mental health crisis in education right now, because the crisis is going on. Teachers are overworked. They've been through a lot. A lot of teachers have left education, and now that we're trying to fill the gaps in, there's a lot of shortages of teachers right now. My advice to you is this: you got to be all in as a servant leader. You're the leader. You're at the top. You set the culture. You set the tone. Any culture has to be driven. It has to come from the top down, but it has to be driven from the bottom up. And if you don't get buy-in from your educators, your teachers, your bus drivers, everybody that works in the district staff, if they don't buy into your culture, then you're fighting a war on many different fronts. And the schools that I've seen that have done it really well is they figure out what their culture is. Know your culture, because if you can't define your culture, that means you've got a culture problem. If you can't tell me what your core values are, then you need some core value training. But when we have these values, we drive this culture, we get buy-in. This happens from things like listening. Man, everyone wants to feel like they've been heard, Tom. And once we feel like we've been heard, we feel like we're on the same team. And once we feel like we're on the same team, then we're going to do more. We're going to sacrifice. We're going to work harder. We're going to do things that teammates do, because now our goals are aligned with each other. Now your goals are my goals and my voice is your voice. So I would say that, it's going to take a culture of listening. It's going to take a culture of authentic vulnerability. And I say authentic vulnerability because, being vulnerable is a strength, and people think about that word vulnerability and they think that that's a weakness, and that's not true, because vulnerability is a strength. Because when we're vulnerable, we can draw people into us, but it has to be authentic, Tom, because people can sniff it out if you're not authentic. And if you're not authentic, it really works against you to come in and be something that you're not, because people can see that. But I think also another core value that your culture must have is a culture of caring for each other, and having people learn to care for the people around them, pick them up when they're down. One of the things that I've seen work really well was at a school district just now in Bridge City, Texas. And Bridge City, Texas went all in on the coffee bean. And in fact, we started in August of 2021 with the convocation, and they marched it out and they brought the coffee bean message in the curriculum to all grade levels and all teachers with professional developments and everything else. Tom, I was there this morning. This school was on fire, man. These kids are chanting coffee beans, coffee. And it's like they're dealing with it. The counselors are telling me at this elementary school, they're like, we've never seen this before. We've never had a situation where it's like, bullying. The topic of bullying came up. And I said, hey, what are you doing with bullying right now? They're like, but this coffee bean culture, they kept telling me, is changing the whole dynamic for a bully, because now a bully inside of this coffee bean culture feels like they really have nowhere to run and hide. Bullies that feel like they have to go somewhere to run and hide because everybody around them is smiling. They're all telling each other to be a coffee bean, or you're being a carrot, you're being an egg. But this culture of inclusivity is something that's formed up around the coffee bean message. And I can't stress it enough. I mean, even if you don't pick up the coffee bean message, pick up core values and culture that your people can relate to, that your people will buy into, because that's what you have to have. You have to have buy-in from everybody in your district.
Absolutely. Some powerful stuff there, my friend. So doing a lot of this work around SEL, some things around mental health. I also know in your personal work, you have a foundation as well that's also looking at some of the teacher shortages, especially for Black males. Talk to us a little about the foundation work that you're doing. I asked you this question at dinner and could have listened to all night because it's such a need, and what a way to actually be able to step out in your foundation and do some work that's truly needed in our nation.
Yeah, so I heard this statistic during the pandemic that, and it's not a pandemic statistic, but it just took me until the year 2021 to finally hear that less than 2% of the teachers in America are Black men. And this kind of startled me because I grew up in a predominantly Black town. I had a lot of Black male educators around me growing up. But when I heard that statistic, I thought to myself, man, how can that be? Because Black men make up 6.5% of the population of this country. Black people make up about 13% of the population, a little bit more than that. But Black men make up about 6.5% of the population, yet they only make up less than 2% of our teachers in America. That means students aren't getting to experience having a Black male teacher around them. And I thought to myself, I know a place where half the population was Black men. And if you're having trouble recruiting Black male teachers, Black males to become teachers, why don't you let me go to this place that I know of where half the population is Black men, and some of them have the ability to be a teacher, and they're really not being used for anything right now. And that's prison. That's prison, Tom. I got to live in a world, being a white guy, being thrown into a maximum security level 5 penitentiary. First of all, everything in prison revolves around race. That's just the way the inmates wanted in there. And I got to see a world for the first time where being white was no longer the advantage, where being white meant that I couldn't sit on a certain row of benches, or I got my face kicked in the rec yard. And so I got to experience the dynamic from the other side of things. And I listened and I learned when I was in there, and I saw other Black men in there. I was taught by other Black men. The guy that taught me the story of the coffee bean was a Black man. He was a teacher in my life. So I thought to myself, if I could find a state prison system somewhere in America that would allow me to go into their prison system and find incarcerated Black men who have the kind of crime that you can already be a teacher, because every state that I've looked at in America, Tom, this is something interesting that I learned. Every state in America allows certain felons to be teachers. That's a fact. I mean, there's most felonies you don't want inside of a school. There's for obvious reasons, but there are felons that they allow to become teachers. For example, with my felony of organized crime, I'm not a violent criminal. I could be a teacher in probably every state in America. So I had to find a state prison system that would work with me on that, with the Be a Coffee Bean Foundation. I had to find a mentoring group that would work with me. I found this group called Call Me Mister, and Call Me Mister goes into their flagship is at their flagship university is at Clemson University. They go into high schools in South Carolina, predominantly Black high schools, and they find young Black boys graduating high school. They give them a scholarship to Clemson for 4 years in elementary education. And when these men graduate from Clemson, they've gotten a 4-year elementary education degree. They were mentored for 4 years in a co-curricular program called Call Me Mister, which is mentoring and modeling to help them become men. These men go teach in the toughest elementary schools, the Title I underperforming, predominantly Black elementary schools. So I got in touch with the Call Me Mister guys at Clemson through my friend Dabo Sweeney, and I pitched my idea to them. And I said, what if I could find a state prison system that would allow me to go out and find some of these men that could still be teachers? Their felony wouldn't hold them back from that. And my foundation would give them a scholarship in elementary education. And at the end of their time in prison, when they've gotten their degree, they'll parole out of prison. But you can't stop there, Tom. I realized that the reentry process is such a minefield for so many people. There's a reason why so many people go back to prison in the first 3 years. Reentry is very tough. But I tell people all the time, especially when we're talking about resilience, that landmines are only dangerous if you don't know where they are. Because if you know where a landmine is, then you can step around that. So when these guys will graduate and then parole out of prison with their elementary degree in hand, I'll walk them through that minefield that's reentry, because now my foundation, the Be a Coffee Bean Foundation, has a used car for them, has a wardrobe for them to teach in, has a place for them to live for the first year that they're out of prison. And their first year, student teacher salary and the money, the cost that goes into having a student mentor teacher to mentor them, we'll pay for all of that. In return, these guys go teach in the toughest elementary school systems in that state, the Title I underperforming, majority Black schools where the crime rate is the highest now, because now we're adding that element of where the crime rate's the highest because we've got a guy that's been in the criminal justice system before. And really what I'm doing is I'm taking two problems in one. I'm taking, second chances for a man that has earned a second chance in life, for a Black man that's earned a second chance in life. Then I'm taking, pre-interventions for the kids that need it the most in these school systems that are failing. And I'm taking the school to prison pipeline and I'm reversing it, and I'm making the prison to school pipeline. But I had to find a state that would believe in me first. And the first state that I got to believe in me on this was the state of Louisiana. Now, we're working through some of the stuff. We've got everything in place. McNeese State University has agreed to be our partner university. The Louisiana Department of Corrections is allowing me to go in there and look for incarcerated Black men. 5 is what our first cohort's going to be, to one day have those guys get out and become teachers in some of the toughest school districts in Louisiana. The company, AIG, the big insurance company, has agreed to fund the first 5 guys. So we've got all the funding in hand in place. And so now we're just trying to work through the program and get this thing off the ground and make this happen in the state of Louisiana first. And I truly believe, Tom, that if I can do this in one state, I can do this in any state. And it won't look the same in every state, Tom, because like if I wanted to do this program in the state of West Virginia, if I wanted to find male teachers in the state of West Virginia, I'd probably go for white men, because that's what is the majority of their prison population. That's where the most pain is. And I'm trying to go where the most pain is. Louisiana is 48th in education. They're 50th in corrections. I figured what better state to go to first to try a program like this. Their teacher shortage is one of the biggest in America. And if I did this program in South Dakota, for example, in South Dakota would be indigenous men inside their prison system, because that's where the most pain is. But I truly believe, Tom, because I am a living testament of that people are redeemable, that with hope, anything is possible, and that a mistake doesn't necessarily make you a mistake, and that we are not the sum of our worst day. that your past is your lesson. You can learn from it. You can teach other people with it. The present, today is a gift, and the future is your motivation. So my motivation is to find ways to help the kids that are most in dire need of interaction with a male role model. And right now in the state of Louisiana, it's going to be Black young boys that are most in need of these men.
Yeah. Wow. Remember you were telling me that at dinner, and I continue to just ask some questions and pour into, and here we are on the podcast listening again, and just, kudos for doing the right work, recognizing multiple needs and saying, let's actually do something about it, not just point the need out, and as Future Ready Schools, as an equity focused organization, we continue to look for ways to connect and work with underserved populations. And wow, what incredible work you're leading there. So you just mentioned the word hope. And another thing, I'm going back to our last conversation where we sat down and broke bread together, was one of the things you mentioned is that the part of the reason the prison system was bringing you in is that people need hope, and you're somebody that's been there, lived alongside of them, and can offer that glimpse of hope. And one of the questions I've asked every person on our podcast for this season is, what is it that gives you hope right now? But I'm going to turn that question a little bit, going back to specifically what you said to me a while back about those folks needing hope. And so tell us a little bit about that. I saw recently on your social media, and by the way, if you're listening, you're not following Damon on social media, you need to follow, you need to connect, because you'll continue to get this motivation. We'll hit that at the end here, but talk to us a little about hope, some of your experience with that. I see the letters that you're getting that pour into your home from inmates around the country. Talk to us about the importance of hope for them, but also what advice do you have for school and district leaders that are feeling beaten down, that are feeling like they're just crawling along, just trying to get by at a time that's been a challenge for them?
Yeah, I think the first thing to understand about hope and how important it is we have to first understand that everybody that we meet is struggling in life. Everybody is struggling with something. I struggle, Tom, you struggle, your listeners out there, everybody's struggling in life. And it's so important for us to be kind to everyone we meet, because being kind is a choice. You have to choose to be kind. You don't have to be kind. You have to choose to be kind. But being kind is the best choice you can make. And I know these schools are struggling, and especially when I do these teacher convocations, these district convocations, I talk about the fact that everybody is coming in need, but we all have this power inside of us to impact life in ways that we can't even imagine. We have this power inside. It's like a superpower inside of us to connect with human life, and that when you see that light go off in someone's eyes, you can't deny what you can see. There's a good story about this too, Tom, from one of my favorite guys in education, Mr. Rogers. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, man. I loved Mr. Rogers. I watched Mr. Rogers all the time. But before Mr. Rogers was a children's television show guy, he was a Presbyterian minister. And he told a story about something that happened at a church service one Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He said he went to this church service, and he said there was a substitute preacher that came in that day. And so he sat through this substitute preacher's sermon. And at the end of this guy's sermon, Mr. Rogers thought to himself, man, that's the worst sermon I've ever heard. He said, this guy was terrible. Tom, he said, people were nodding off, falling asleep. He almost fell asleep himself. So just as Mr. Rogers was about to turn to this little bitty old lady sitting next to him to tell her how terrible he thought this man was, he had to stop. He bit his tongue, because the little old lady next to him was bawling and crying, and she was in tears. And she turned to Mr. Rogers and she said, that was the most beautiful sermon I've ever heard in my life. She said it was the absolute right thing I need to hear at the absolute right time in my life. And she said, I'll never forget where I was this day that I heard this man's sermon. I mean, he saw the light go off in her eyes, man. You can't deny what you can see. But it floored him, because, this guy was so obviously terrible, man. The rest of the church did not agree with what this one lady was feeling. But this guy so profoundly impacted this woman's life that he realized that day that every person has a power inside them to connect with human life in ways that we probably don't even realize. But he learned another very important lesson that day, a lesson that he would never forget. He learned that while he was coming in judgment, that little old lady was coming in need. In need. And that's what I would tell these educators, these superintendents, everybody out there right now. Everybody is coming in need right now. This is one of the hardest times in recorded human history, and everybody's coming in need. It's not just your staff, it's your students, it's everybody that's struggling right now in this country. And we have to find a way to meet those needs for the period of time that we have these kids with us, the period of time we have our staff with us. We need to make these environments as good as possible around. And it all starts with your smile, Tom. It does. Your smile. The lady from parole, she asked me, she said, Mr. West, she said, you didn't just change yourself inside this prison. She said, you changed this prison, particularly violent prison, the Styles unit. She said, you changed this entire prison around you. And I was like, yes, ma'am, I did it. And I did it with a smile. And I had to explain that to her, that I came in on day one because the guy, Mr. Jackson, that told me about the coffee bean, he told me that you have two choices with your energy. You have negative or positive energy that you put out. And he said, whatever kind of energy you put out, you're going to attract back. This is called the law of attraction. So he's telling me to avoid walking around with a mean look on my face. And, don't try to look hard, because trying to look hard will really invite negative people in your way, because negative energy attracts negative energy. He said, but if you'll walk around that prison with a smile on your face and let those guys know that they're not getting you, no matter what they do, they cannot break you. He said, you will change that prison from the inside out. And he said, the best part about it is the other coffee beans in prison, the other positive inmates, they'll find you because of your positive energy. And so I would tell every educator, every administrator, everybody out there, you have to create that positive energy. You have to create that positive feeling in people. But when you have a workforce, you have a teacher's force, you have people going out there with a smile on their face, that's going to come back at them, with everybody on staff that they encounter, every student they encounter, every parent that they encounter. You can't talk about education without talking about the family dynamic. It's like a triangle. It's like you have the students down here, you have the staff up here, and you have the families down here. And you've got to connect all of those people together, all those groups together, to have a healthy educational culture. And that starts with a smile. Start it with the smile. Smile everywhere you go.
Oh, what a great word of encouragement there. I love it. Love the thought process. Thank you for walking us through that. So one more piece before I let you run here. Just recently, I saw your latest book with Coach Stephen Mackey, somebody we both know, another amazing individual. On day one of pre-sale was already a bestseller, and that is The Locker Room. Tell us a little about what we can expect. Opening just a couple weeks here, I think in early May, but they can order it now. Tell us a little bit about The Locker Room, if you would.
So The Locker Room is a coaching fable, and it reads like a John Gordon type book. Because I mean, John and I are great friends, and I've always been a fan of John Gordon's book, even before I wrote a book with him, The Coffee Bean. But The Locker Room is a coaching fable about a team that's struggling to deal with an issue of a player that said something really disrespectful to some of the other players in the team. And what they've got in this book is this team, this really good team, has got a broken locker room. Now, teams that win championships, Tom, they have a locker room that's functional. This is a locker room is not just a place for athletes. This locker room could be a place for teachers in a school, for men and women in the armed forces, for anybody in a business. It's a place where you can go to, where you can talk about anything, where you can have difficult conversations. But there's certain things about a locker room of teams that win that are different from teams that don't. Because in a locker room, the teams that win, your goals are my goals, and your success is my success. And everybody gets a chance to be heard. Everybody gets a chance to be heard because people are listening in a locker room that works. And a mistake doesn't necessarily make you a mistake in a locker room. That means that there's no more cancel culture when we come into the locker room, and we can have a conversation about any tough topic inside of a locker room. And that's what this book is about. It's about how to have tough conversations when you're dealing with different personalities, people from different walks, different hangups in life. How do we come together in this one locker room? Because honestly, Tom, right now, America doesn't have a locker room, and America needs a locker room right now. And so when Stephen and I set out to write this book, we wanted to write a book that would unite everybody in this country. And the feedback that we got on the marketing that we did some market research on it, sent the book out to coaches and teachers and educators that we knew all around America. Some of them were people that are hardcore, they're MAGA. And then some people were BLM type people. I mean, we're talking about the far sides of the spectrum, and everybody from every point of the spectrum in America came back and said, when is this book coming out? I've got to have this book for my team, for my teachers, for my administrators, for my staff. We threaded the needle on some of the toughest conversations going on that aren't going on really right now in America. But we threaded the needle and we gave it to them. And the prescription in this book, you'll have to get the book to read it. But the prescription is humility and grace. Because when you have people coming into the same space with humility and grace, then you can have any kind of conversation and you can become the best versions of yourself. The best of me for the best of you, Tom.
Awesome. Absolutely love it. I cannot wait to get my hands on that copy as well. So real quick, Damon, how can people best connect with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, my website, damonwest.org. Great place to find me. Social media tags, Twitter, Instagram, at Damon West 7. I'm also on LinkedIn under Damon West. The books are available anywhere books are sold. People love to go to Amazon. Amazon kind of runs the world now, Tom. My books, The Locker Room, The Coffee Bean, they're all available on Amazon. But yeah, you won't want to miss The Locker Room. It's coming out. It's got a study guide that goes with it. It's really going to be a neat deal.
Awesome stuff. Well, that's Damon West, everybody. Damon, thank you so much for your time today.
Tom, thanks for your time, brother. And I'm going to call you when I'm in Pennsylvania. I think I'll be there in May. So I'll call you when I'm in Pennsylvania.
Can't wait to see you, my friend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot.